It's time for the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth, financial literacy educator and speaker, entrepreneur, and chairman of the board of a bank in formation. Take charge of your financial future with your personal bank. Now here's Ference Toth.
Welcome to the Your Personal Bank Show. First thing I want to say is if you missed the last show or the John Burley interview, I'm going to strongly encourage you go to yourpersonalbank.com. You can listen to that or any of the previously recorded shows, of course. John is the most knowledgeable person I know in real estate. He's my real estate mentor. He's a best-selling author. He owns thousands of properties in single-family residences in Arizona. He's been doing it over 35 plus years. He's an educator, and he's been probably our favorite guest on this show. We've had him on several times. And I do ask John, what about interest rates, the economy, and increasing interest rates, inflation, all that? How does he see that affecting real estate? So again, I know of no one else better to ask those questions to. And if you want more information on that, go to yourpersonalbank.com, listen to that or any of the previously recorded shows. Today, I feel like we really need to continue to discuss the most important impact economically for people right now, and clearly that's inflation. We are at historical highs. The consumer price index, as of the end of February, for example, of 2020, had increased, according to the government figures, 7.9%, which is the highest rate we've seen since 1982. So over 40 years, literally. And what's even worse, okay, the consumer price index is bad enough. What that means, of course, is, for those that you don't know, is if something cost $100 a year ago, it basically costs $108 today. So your buying power is being eroded by inflation. Now, some people say, well, I got to raise or increase my income. Here's the thing you need to understand. Unless your income increased 8%, if let's say you got an 8% raise or increase in income with your business, well, that basically means you're marking time. You're not getting ahead. You're not getting behind. And most people, in terms of jobs at least, have not seen that kind of increase this past year. So they're falling behind. If you're investing or you have a business and it has not increased at least by 8% over the past year, you're basically, again, falling behind. It's one of those things that's tough to keep up with for a lot of people. And that's why it's so impactful, of course. But as bad as the consumer price index is, and that's the one the media and people tend to pay the most attention to, because of course that includes things that we purchase, right? The goods and services that we as consumers purchase. Actually, the producer price index, or known as the PPI, is, I think, in my opinion, a much more valuable indicator. It's a leading indicator, let's put it that way, in terms of inflation and what to expect. And what the producer price index is it's basically like the consumer price index. It's a basket of what producers are paying for goods and, for the materials that they need to make stuff, right? So what are the producers? What are the manufacturers? What are the people, the businesses that make stuff that we then purchase? What are they paying for their goods to make the stuff? And in February, this was very quiet. I didn't see much on this, but the producer price index was 10% into February 2020, year over year. So in other words, a year ago, if you were making widgets, your cost of making widgets, if it cost you $100 to make a widget, it now costs you $110 to make that same widget. And again, and of course, those increase in costs, if you understand anything about business, and most people do, is businesses do not pay for the increase in costs. Those, of course, are passed on to the consumer, you and I. And it's done many ways in terms of they either raise the price. We've seen that already. They reduce the quantity. I kind of jokingly shared where a friend of mine was counting the number of chips in their potato chip bag she bought at Costco, and I don't know. We don't know if it's coincidence or not, but the bag was the same size, but the new bag held 7 less chips than the one she had bought previously, just a few months prior. We've seen smaller packaging. I mean, if you go into the grocery store at all recently, you've seen much of that. So they either increase the price, reduce the quantity, or reduce the quality. So we don't get as quality goods, right? Well, here's why the producer price index is so important and is such a powerful leading indicator. Typically, on average, when producers make stuff, about roughly 6 months later is when it gets purchased by the consumer. So economists use this very often, again, as a leading indicator and a pretty good idea of where inflation is going to be about 6 months from now. So if this holds true, as it historically has, we could easily be seeing rates of inflation 6 months from now of about 10%. Which is higher than we are even seeing now. Also, the question I've been getting a lot here recently is, how long do we think this is going to last? Because we've heard, even from last year, and by the way, I was talking to a client yesterday asking me that question, and I was showing them on the website and the different shows where I was discussing inflation because they had an interest in that. And it turns out I started talking about inflation on this show, the Your Personal Bank show, in May of 2021, so almost a year ago. And I was saying then that inflation is one of those things that it's like a genie when it comes out of the bottle. It's really, really hard to get it back in the bottle. And we had a lot of our leaders, economic leaders and political leaders, you remember this, stating things like, oh, it was just transitory. That was the popular statement at the time. Jerome Powell, head of the Federal Reserve, was famous for saying that. Janet Yellen, head of the Treasury. And they stuck with that line for a while until it clearly got stale. And finally they had to admit, sometime last fall, started saying, well, it's going to last longer, perhaps the end of the year, beginning of next year. 2022 was what they were referring to. And then, of course, now Jerome Powell they're stating, well, it's going to be around longer. In fact, Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, said recently that we'll have uncomfortable levels of inflation through 2022 and probably 2023. And I think that's a little bit more honest assessment. We haven't exactly gotten clear, information, right, from our political or economic leaders, and that's frustrating. Sometimes we just need to know the truth, you know what I mean? And so we can plan accordingly and live our lives accordingly. And it's so frustrating when it's hard to cut through the noise and get to what is probably closer to the truth. And what I think, again, this is my opinion, but I'm going on history and what economists show us and what's happened in the past, is the producer price index tends to be an indicator of what of inflation is going to be about 6 months from now. February 2022 is 10%, one of the highest readings I think ever. So if that holds true, we're looking at about 10% inflation about 6 months from now, which means it's still on the upswing. We haven't even hit the top of the curve, if you know what I mean. But that's what the numbers are telling us. So I'm going to really encourage you to stay tuned in the next segments, because I'm going to talk much more further about this, and of course the role energy is playing in causing this inflation. Now, if you want to help offset inflation, I'm also talk about that. If you want more information, I'm going to encourage you to contact me at yourpersonalbank.com. So stay tuned to the next rest of the show. You don't want to miss it. Well, actually, I'm already back. You saw here a situation where I got really messed up on my time, and I thought it was kind of a short segment, and I cut off to go to the break, and my producers, our sound guys, are like, oh, wait a minute, you got like 4 more minutes. So anyway, well, I'll finish the thought I had on before, so again, apologize. Stuff happens sometimes, right? Anyway, on the inflation front, of course, with the idea that, the current administration we're looking at with energy prices, which I'm going to talk about more in the next segment, so I'm going to encourage you to stay tuned. The high prices of fuel, I should say, are going to push inflation or high cost of goods and services, well, for the next 3 years, unless they change their tune significantly. And we don't see any signs of that. And so a lot of people, so how long do I think inflation is going to last? Unless the current administration makes major changes or OPEC makes major changes to the production, and so far they haven't, we're probably dealing with this for the next 3 years, aren't we? At least. And then, like I said, it won't go away right away. It takes time for that to happen. So the second big question, I got a couple minutes to share with that is, and I'll talk about more in the next segments, is what to do. Well, traditionally, when you have a high inflation environment and high interest rates, you want to purchase assets, with that tangible assets. Typically, real estate's one of the most popular, but real estate prices have gone through the roof already prior to all this. Inflation or interest-sensitive assets are probably one of the best bets for a lot of folks. And your personal bank does fit into that. Like I said, we're paying 5.75 dividends right now. That's likely going to go higher. Historically, always has when interest rates go up, because dividends and interest rates are highly correlated. In fact, I've shared with a lot of people that if we do get into a high interest rate environment going forward, like the Fed is clearly leading that direction, your personal bank could be one of the best investments that you could own in the next few years. We're going to find out, but certainly history proves that. In high interest rate situations, these things have paid double digits. So my point is, I'm not saying that's the average, but that's what it has done in the past. So, and again, when you figure you've got access to the funds, highly liquid, tax-free, that's a nice benefit. Because, with inflation, who knows what's going to happen with taxes, right? Is that the next shoe to drop? We have a lot of debt. Who knows? And then secondly, like I said, the positive arbitrage, right? The ability then, when you do, you can. I have a lot of folks who are saying, and this, I guess this is probably some of the best advice that I can give, and what folks are what I'm hearing from a lot of experts is there's so much uncertainty right now. Might be best to just kind of sit on the sidelines for a bit and wait and see what happens. You know what I mean? But you don't want to sit in cash because inflation's going so fast. You're going to be losing money. Well, at least if you're making, say, 6% plus, with guarantees and tax-free, you're not getting ahead, but you're not moving too far behind. And with highly liquid, say we have an adjustment in a correction in the real estate market or clearly in the stock market, you see opportunities, you can pull the trigger. I firmly believe that in this next year, there are going to be some tremendous opportunities in many of those markets. And having the money just while it's sitting, make something, and having it liquid and available, and then get positive arbitrage to even enhance your returns when you do pull the trigger to invest. That's pretty awesome. So again, stay tuned in the next segment. We'll cover more of this. If you want more information, contact me toll free 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com.
For more information on Your Personal Bank, feel free to contact Ference at yourpersonalbank.com. Back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. We've really been talking, or I've been discussing, as I should say, initially about inflation, the impact it's having on people. The devastating impact it's starting to have on some folks already. And one of the biggest questions I get constantly is, how long do you think this is going to last? And of course, obviously no one knows the answer to that question, but I think two really good indicators, as I was stating in the first segment, is the producer price index and the consumer price index. And as I was stating in the first segment, the consumer price index came in at the end of February 2022 at 7.9%. One of the highest reading we've seen in 40 years. But as bad as that is, and that's the price that consumers are paying, the producer price index came in at 10% for February. So that's the price producers are paying to make stuff. And that's generally considered a leading indicator. Most economists state that should give you an idea where inflation is going to be in about 6 months from now, typically. And so what that ends up telling us is, not only are the inflation numbers, if you notice, been going up, they've been creeping up each month, all right, for the last 6 or 8 months or so, but they're continuing to go up. And if the producer price index is at 10%, that means it's very likely we're going to see consumers paying that, dealing with the 10% inflation rate about 6 months from now. And is that the top of the curve? I mean, are we at the top of the mountain yet? And we really won't know that for sure until we start curling over and going back down the other side, so to speak. So we're still climbing the mountain, so is what it boils down to, on inflation. And that's the scary part. How high is it going to get? How bad is it going to get? There's no question that the war that's happening, that's been happening, of course, with Russia and with Ukraine is not helping. But here's where things could certainly get worse, and that's frustrating. But Ukraine and Russia are two of the 5 largest producers of wheat in the world, and Ukraine, for example, is number 5. If they continue fighting this war and they miss the spring planting season, something like 25% of the world's wheat supply comes from those two countries. And even though, like the United States, we don't import any wheat from either country, less supply means prices go up. And of course, wheat impacts just a lot of foods, So just right there, things like that are pressures to continue keeping the prices, inflation high. But the one that's worse, the 800-pound gorilla in the room, no question, is energy. And economists, I've read a number of them, have been stating things like, well, about 2/3 of the inflation we're dealing with right now comes from the higher energy prices. And that makes sense because just about every product we purchase in the store or even online, it gets shipped to you or whatever, the bottom line, it gets transported, right? And most products, beginning to end, I was sharing this with a client just a few days ago. She works at Costco. And we used an example of, I know Costco has their own farms and they raise their own beef, for example, to make hamburger. And I said, if you think about it, the cost of, raising that, buying that food, the corn or whatever it is they feed them, right, has gone up. That has to be transported to the farm to feed the animals. And then when they take the animals to the processing plant, they have to be transported. And then from the processing plant to the warehouse or wherever it goes, transported again, and then to the store where the consumer purchases it. So there's at least 3, 4, 5 trips involved in the process of creating that pound of hamburger. You could apply that to any product you purchase. Okay, some come from overseas even, so it's even more transportation costs, right? When you increase the cost of the fuel it takes to get those things to the consumer, from the producer to the consumer, it affects literally everything. That's what it boils down to. So with energy being the biggest contributor to inflation, it was in the 1970s certainly, and is now, and that will continue to hold true. The current energy policy that we have, by not giving leases to drill oil here and shutting down pipelines and being generally negative towards oil energy or energy production in general, just curtailing that means, again, just like with the wheat in Ukraine, less supply means higher prices. And I've heard some people argue, well, like shutting down the pipeline, that wasn't going to happen. That wasn't going to make a difference right away. It would have by now, probably, because that was about a year ago. It probably would have been coming online or very soon. Would have certainly been helpful. But it's not even about, say, the Keystone Pipeline. It's the message that's being sent by the current administration, which cools the jets, is negative towards investment and not allowing drilling, right, on federal lands, but even private lands. If you make it clear that to do business, it's going to be difficult, it's going to cost more, there's going to be more regulations, that's going to cause investors not to want to invest in that. It's going to cause companies, energy companies that generally produce the energy, not to want to stick their neck out and do as much. So it's the message more than the action even that is sent that causes price. I mean, let's face it, Oil futures, the price is about the future price of oil, what people think it's going to be in the future. If the administration just did a 180 and said, hey, we're going to open up the leasing, we're going to focus on becoming energy independent again and produce natural gas. I've seen articles here where literally we have the natural gas that the oil and gas groups calling out to Biden and say, hey, we have it. We could double our production and we could provide the natural gas to Europe that they were purchasing from Putin. Okay, that would go a long ways to reducing, obviously, the dependency on that energy, but also the prices, right? And if it just came out and said, hey, okay, we're going to go for that, the prices would like immediately, and I mean immediately, drop. Okay, I mean you would see it immediately. So I can't say that often enough because that's what would happen, right? So it's about the policies and the message that the administration is putting out there. And what's so frustrating is if they really wanted to do something for the American people instead of following their agenda of green energy, they would put all energy on the table. I mean, I'm not against green energy, but we should be looking at all sources. But instead, our energy secretary states the Ukraine crisis provides urgent moment for Congress to act on clean energy. Look, the argument that the pipeline wouldn't produce oil right away, well, neither will green energy. The pipeline would have produced or generated availability more oil, for example, in about a year or so. Folks, green energy isn't going to be online like we need it for decades because the technology is not there. That's the bottom line. So they're wanting to put us through decades of transition before the technology is ready. Stay tuned in the next segment. We're going to discuss this further, inflation and what to do, so don't miss it.
For more information on Your Personal Bank, feel free to contact Ference at yourpersonalbank.com. Back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. We're discussing inflation and the role really energy and the energy policy is playing in that. Like I stated in the previous segment, the many economists are stating that about 2/3 of the inflation we're dealing with comes from energy because, of course, just about every good we purchase is transported multiple times in many cases. So it affects everything. And so the answer to how long will inflation last? Here's I think probably the most accurate answer you're going to get anywhere, and that is until something happens to reduce the price of energy, we're going to be dealing with high inflation. And with the current stance of our current administration of being negative to the energy that we have and can produce that's cost effective, unless they change their tune, or OPEC makes a major, starts drilling a whole bunch, right? Increases the supply, which they're not doing so far. Until something like that happens, we're going to see high inflation. And that's the bottom line. So if that's the case, we're dealing with another 3 years with the current administration, right? And unfortunately, I don't see them changing their tune one way or another. Here's the thing, even with the midterms coming up this fall in November 2022, certainly, the current administration could lose the House and the Senate, right? But they could still follow their executive process. There's some things Congress can do, but to help, but we're going to be dealing with a high energy costs, which translates to high inflation for the next 3 years plus, right? At least. And again, as I stated at the beginning, inflation is one of those things, even if you start doing things right, it's not like it just disappears. It takes a while. It's hard to get that genie back in the bottle. And like I said, we still have this current administration talking about, green energy. Okay, that's all great and well and good. But frankly, from a technology standpoint, for green energy to take over the energy needs our country has and uses, it's decades away, folks, most likely, years at least, okay, from a technology standpoint of being able to take over and being cost effective. Look, I'm all for green energy, but I'm also for what's cost effective. And instead of ramming this down our throats and forcing our country down this agenda faster than the technology is ready for it, which is going to cost tremendous economic pain, which for a lot of people, let the technology catch up. You know what I'm saying? It will take over eventually, most likely, but give it a chance. But that's not their agenda. That's not their goal. And of course, like I said this in several previous shows, that, this isn't being done by accident. They have an agenda. They have a purpose. They want to take over, and chaos is part of that. And creating economic chaos is a great way to get a lot of people to rely on the government, which is, in my opinion, frankly, just their goal, plain and simple. But what's so infuriating is you have some very super simple solutions. One, we could just start drilling. I keep being told in here that we have something like 100 years of oil reserves in our borders, something like 200 years of natural gas. We're the number one oil producer in the world when we want to be, and certainly number one natural gas. We could do a lot to help Europe right now, and Ukraine, just by producing the energy that we need and they need to just make it available so they're not reliant on Russia. I mean, that would be a tremendous change, and that was also cut Putin's ability to wage war and receive billions of dollars daily from all the oil that we and others are purchasing from us in Europe primarily, right? But another simple solution is like, I love this one, Canadian energy official to Biden. Why look to Venezuela, Saudi Arabia for oil? We're right next door. They have oil too. And it's a good point. And Canadians don't hate us, right? And I don't know if Saudi Arabia does either. But we're, going to Venezuela, going to certainly not friends, right? It's crazy. It just logically makes no sense. But again, when they have an agenda of creating chaos and fundamentally changing our country and our form of government to a Marxist type system, they've openly said that. They've said it themselves. They don't like to call themselves Marxists, but they use the term progressive, which we all know means Marxist, socialist, communist. But they have absolutely stated repeatedly they want to fundamentally change this country. Well, by messing around with energy is a great way to accomplish that. It changes the fundamentals of our economy and how people should invest and all that. And look, if you want to contact me to discuss how to offset inflation and protect yourself and get some guarantees, reduce market risk, and reduce your taxes, all those kind of stuff, contact me toll-free 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com.
For more information on Your Personal Bank, feel free to contact Ference at yourpersonalbank.com. Back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show, and today we're discussing inflation, and I know I've been talking about that quite often recently, but it's the question and it's the issue that the vast majority of Americans are dealing with. From an economic standpoint, certainly the biggest issue. So, as I was stating in the last segment, the number one question I'm getting recently, or two questions, is how long is this going to last and what should I do? And I've been pretty much addressing how long I think this is going to last by looking at some realistic things, not just being hopeful, but looking at realistic numbers. Like I stated in the first segment, if you missed it, go back to yourpersonalbank.com. You can listen to that or any of the previously recorded shows. But the consumer price index is 7.9, highest we've seen in 40 years. The producer price index is at 10%. These are both February 2022 numbers. And they're still on the increase. So if you notice, the numbers have been increasing each month. And the producer price index is one of those where it's known as a leading indicator. It's what producers pay for to make stuff. And usually economists state that can give you an idea what inflation is going to look like in about 6 months from now, because they're going to pass those costs on to the consumer, right? So if that's the case, clearly we're still on the upswing. We haven't hit the we haven't hit the top of the mountain yet. So looks like at least 6 months from now before we hit the peak. Could be longer. It's going to be a little while before we get to the other side. But even the bigger issue, I think, and most people know what's causing all this, the primary cause is energy. And a lot of that, and it's not just the Ukrainian war, that's certainly exacerbating the problem. But it started a year ago, when the Biden administration sent a very clear message to the energy companies is, we're closed for business. They're not issuing any new leases. They're being very, creating roadblocks and delays and costs and difficulties. The message does a lot to curb investment in projects. And for, if you're a business and it's going to cost you more and the government's on you and it's going to just be more and more difficult, you're going to do less of it, right? So, and the U.S. is the number one energy producer, when we want to be, in the world. And so when you you cut down the production of number one, that affects the entire world. Less supply, higher prices, right? So basic supply and demand. They know this. They're not foolish. They're not stupid. I firmly believe that the administration, at least the people that are actually in power, pulling the strings and making the decisions, and I don't think anyone knows who that is. I think it's a small group of people who are really behind all this, making these decisions. They know what they're doing. And they're doing it on purpose, intentionally, to, as they state, fundamentally change this country. And chaos is a great way to accomplish that. And until we see this administration change direction on energy policy, which so far there's no sign of that whatsoever, we're going to be dealing with this for at least another 3 years, aren't we? I mean, the midterms will help if Republicans take Congress and they take some actions or some things they can do, but the Biden administration would still be there. And so we likely gonna have to deal with this for another 3 years. And what do we got to deal with? Stuff like the energy secretary saying that the Ukraine crisis provides urgent moment for Congress to act on clean energy. Folks, let's be real. You can be the most, biggest proponent of green energy out there, but its technology is not ready for prime time and won't be for years to take over, if not decades. I mean, like you've heard them talk about dreaming about electric buses and things like that. Yes, they're dreams. That's great. But that's all they are right now. And even if we had the technology that was cost effective, it would be years and years to replace the current fleets that are out there of buses and trucks and whatever, right? So this isn't going to happen overnight. So we should have the bottom line is we should have everything on board, everything available until we get to that point where the green energy can take over from a technology standpoint. Should be oil, gas, nuclear, green energy, all of it, all hands on deck. Because right now we have a crisis. We're dealing with a crisis. I know they don't care, but we are dealing with a crisis. And their response, I love this one. I mean, it's from the International Energy Agency, whoever the heck that is. But they're calling for changes in consumer behavior, and they have a 10-point plan. And their plan is that countries should reduce speed limits by at least 10 miles or 10 kilometers an hour, as they put it. Work from home up to 3 days a week where possible. Well, if you can, that's great. Not everybody can do that. Car-free Sundays in cities. I love that one. If that's not an attack on churchgoers, I don't know what is. Why not car-free Saturdays, right? Make public transportation cheaper and incentivize walking and cycling. Well, that sounds great, especially for those who live in the suburbs or in the country where nothing's close. Alternate private car access to roads in large cities. So they're talking about, you can only drive in the city if you have an even or odd plate number on certain days. I mean, crazy, right? Increase car sharing. Okay. Promote efficient driving for freight trucks and delivery of goods. Fine. Use high-speed night trains instead of airplanes. Love that one. That's really effective in much of the country. These are clueless people. Avoid business air travel and reinforce the adoption of electric and more efficient vehicles. They're already doing that. They're overboard on that. But that's their response, right? instead of more practical ones, which would be really super simple, like the Canadian energy official said, hey, why are you going to Venezuela and Saudi Arabia for oil? We're right next door. He's right. Also, we have our own supplies we could just access, all right? Okay? I mean, if we have 100 years of oil, that's based on current technology, known reserves. I think in the next 100 years, we could have the technology to have solar and wind and all these other things be cost effective. The batteries, for example, being far more efficient than they are today. It will give technology time to catch up. But to add insult to injury, so we have record debt, record inflation. Congress, in its infinite wisdom, decides to, and this is understand this is a democratically controlled Congress, they decide to reinstate a process that had been taken out some years ago. They decide to reinstate earmarks. And those of you that don't know what earmarks are, it's just a way for Congress people to spend more of our money. So, for example, they just passed this $1.5 trillion spending bill, and in that includes $9.7 billion, almost $10 billion, that's with a B, for roughly 5,000 projects favored by individual lawmakers. In other words, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of projects, I should say, for hundreds of lawmakers to spend almost $10 billion at a time when we don't have the money, folks. You know, they're paying stuff for things like over $500,000 for a self-reliant urban solar village in Pennsylvania. They're $300,000 for a Hawaiian tree census. Okay, when you're in huge debt, you know. Here's another good one. $2.2 million to build a Bahamian Arts, History, and Cultural Center in Miami. You know, when you are in debt, you don't waste money on things like this. Yeah, Washington State, they got thousands of dollars to scare off seal predators. Okay, let's face it. Even if the money went to all these things, okay, we all know there's going to be waste, corruption, fraud, you name it, like there always is. Okay, and the bottom line is, when you don't have the money, which we don't, we're in debt. Okay, you don't waste money on projects like this. But again, that's how they gain power. Here's reality. The solution is, if your representative wasted money on an earmark for your local area or whatever, you need to vote them out, because this is bad fiscal policy. It's bad for the country. We got enough problems. And and then corporations are no better. You know, this latest, I don't know if you heard about, like Iowans are frustrated because they subsidize Apple. They gave Apple something like, over $200 million in subsidies from Iowa taxpayers for them to build a data center in the state that would provide 50 permanent jobs. $200 million. Where'd all that money go? And the thing is, it's these big corporate giants like Apple that get these sweetheart type deals. I was thinking about that the other day. 50 jobs, that's not that much. When I had my agency in full swing, so to speak, a few years ago, we had 15 W-2 employees full-time. We had 20 to 25 salespeople, 1099, full-time. So my point is simple, is we were hiring somewhere between 40, 45 people full-time jobs as a small business here in Arizona. So we were, not a tiny business. We weren't a huge one, but we were relatively decent small business. Not much. Our business supported nearly as many jobs as Apple got $200 million for. I mean, I would have done it for half that, right? It's ridiculous. It's so outsized of a benefit. Why would they give those kinds of subsidies to a company for 50 jobs? That's nothing. And for a company like Apple, I mean that's a rounding error on a decimal point. That's nothing. They were laughing all the way to the bank, Apple was. And that's just pure stupidity on the lawmakers or whoever was in charge that allowed that. And then I love this one. The other thing from a corporate standpoint, Nestle decided to suspend products in Russia, including Kit Kats. Yeah, we're really going to stop Russia and Putin because they're not going to have Kit Kats anymore. I mean, that's their response. I mean, are you kidding me? Give me a break. And I guess what it really comes down to is you got to ask yourself a simple question. And I think it was Ronald Reagan that asked this, but don't quote me on this. I'm not positive. But you got to ask yourself a simple question. I know it, and the question is simple: are you better off today than you were a year ago? And that's to me, that's a pretty straightforward and simple question. Forget the politics of it all. Forget who you like or don't like, or all that kind of stuff. It's not about. It shouldn't be about a popularity contest, whether you like someone in office or not. To me, it's never been about that. It's always been about what type of job are they going to do. If you put them in office, are they going to give $200 million to Apple to come to your city or state to provide 50 jobs, which is a joke? Okay, that's ridiculous. Are they going to vote for earmarks and spend hundreds of thousands or even $1 million or billion of our taxpayer money on pork, on just ridiculous, stupid stuff, which is bad for everyone? Are they going to support? Are they going to support us to be energy independent and not rely on other countries? As a matter of national security. Are they going to represent us? I guess is what it really boils down to. Are they going to represent the American people, or are they going to just pursue their own agenda that oftentimes, really frankly, is nothing more than them looking out for themselves and no one else? If you want more information on how to take control of your money, your future, reduce taxes, offset inflation, you want a solution, I'm going to tell you, contact me at toll-free 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com.
For more information on Your Personal Bank, feel free to contact Ference at yourpersonalbank.com. This show is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information. The presenter and guest on this program do not engage in legal, accounting, or tax advice. Professional advice regarding your situation should be sought if required. Products and riders may have limitations and may not be available in all states. Excessive unpaid loans may affect performance. Distributions may become taxable if not managed properly. Replacements may not be suitable for everyone. There may be charges when replacing coverage. Compare when considering a replacement. Dividend rates and baseline of credit rates may change. Contact yourpersonalbank.com for current rates.